Thank you very much, Bernhard, for the kind introduction, and of course also for the invitation to this talk here in the format of Eawag. I am, of course, very happy to be here to contribute to that. And as you have seen, my topic is spatial sustainability sciences. I assume that everyone who has joined here is very familiar with sustainability sciences as a broader field, but maybe not everyone with the idea of spatial sustainability sciences as a subfield of that. So that's what I would like to address today more specifically. And I would also like to use this opportunity to illustrate what this field might be about by looking at the institute that I'm currently leading, which is looking at spatial sustainability science as the field within which it is implementing its research. So I will use some of the projects that we are currently doing to illustrate the idea. Yeah, just as a starting point and a very obvious one, why do we have sustainability sciences? Well, clearly because there are grand challenges that are not only of an ecological character, as you can see here, this is about the planetary tipping points and the necessity to address them, the ecological imperative, if you like. They are, of course, also of a societal kind, and I will not dive deep into that. This is just to evoke the grand challenges, and I'm sure that you're aware of that. What I would like to point out more here is, of course, that these are problems and challenges that are operating at a global scale, and this is, of course, also part of the problem, because when it comes to addressing them, when it comes to developing strategies, action that are able to deal with this type of challenges, we will, of course, have to turn towards specific territories, societies, and places in order to do so. So there's a flip side, of course, of the global challenges that we are looking at, which is that they, of course, come down to very specific and concrete territories where livelihoods are being affected in very negative ways. Already now, as you know, this is Germany in 2021, a large flooding disaster you might have heard of, but of course in many other places of the world as well. And also in different forms. There is heat, there's biodiversity, so there are a variety of really substantive challenges which make for also substantive, the need for substantive responses. And the question is for us, of course, how to close this knowledge action gap, because understanding about these problems is one thing, acting about them is another. So there's response here, and this is the raison d'etre, if you like, of sustainability science, is of course to develop knowledge that allows to move from knowledge to action, and that connects between these global phenomena and global problems at the scale of planet Earth and larger systems of societies and very concrete local places. If you are aware of sustainability sciences, you might recognize a number of these milestones here. I just took the timeline from a paper, not to pay too much attention to any individual feature here, but rather to evoke this development of sustainability sciences as a very broad, very interdisciplinary field, of course, that has received particular support, of course, also from different angles at a global scale. And which meanwhile, there are a number of reviews, field reviews out that illustrate what this field is composed of and how it has evolved. Some of those already recognize a certain level of saturation at the moment in terms of its development. Nevertheless, it has seen a very dynamic and a very nonlinear development over the past 2 decades, you can say. So sustainability science is involving actually a broad range from the natural sciences, engineering, towards the social sciences and the humanities. And it does so with a view to particular questions. And I'm drawing here on some early definitions that you might be familiar with. This is from the US NSF program at that time, the first one maybe that tried to define it. And I think the key points here I would like to emphasize is there has always been a certain spatial awareness, a spatial dimension in the thinking about sustainability sciences. As you can see here in this emphasis about the global and the local, as well as about the place, or in another example, another definition here, in the example about uh, also the regional character of the types of problems which are being addressed. This is interesting because it highlights this intermediary scale, which is connecting between very specific and concrete places and global phenomena and global symptoms. And therefore, it clearly already articulates the necessity to deal with space in a certain way. And I think this is precisely what I'm interested in here. In which way? Because if we look at, and this is one of the reviews of the field that I was just mentioning here, if we look at what are the actual ontologies and epistemologies that the sustainability sciences field stands for, we can see that there is certainly a very broad ontological diversity, which involves everything from plain realism, positivism to constructivism or relational accounts. As well as, of course, the broad range of disciplines that contribute to that. But this is a very random combination. It depends on the problem complex that you look at. It depends on the phenomena that you look at, what comes together there. So not a clear demarcation of any particular ontologies here. There is, however, one very important boundary object which works within sustainability sciences, which is system thinking, as broadly articulated as that, which allows you to connect between a variety of system-related ontologies, or to use at least system terminology to do so. And this is a very important feature, I think, of the field. When we ask for space within this, you might recognize that there are some landscape-like features here in this picture. However, a clear idea or a clear articulation of why there is a need for addressing space, or in what way space plays out, that is not really the case. There is maybe an implicit epistemology that addresses it, just like in the questions that I've evoked here. So the need to address particular regional or place-related phenomena, but hardly any clear ontological framing in terms of space. Now, that doesn't really do justice to the concept of space and its relevance if we think about sustainability theory, because essentially sustainability is all about the distribution of justice in space and time. So therefore, space is actually quite a constitutive element when we talk about sustainability problems or solutions. It's hard to think of sustainability without it. And therefore, there is obviously a need to draw more substantively on concepts, notions, and maybe also ontologies of space within sustainability sciences. This has happened occasionally over the last decade, in particular with a variety of contributions. However, I do believe that there is still a large room actually left for doing this in a more substantive manner, in particular with a view to this constitutive role that space plays in creating sustainability problems and solutions. Oh, I stay with that slide. It's not that we are starting from scratch there, obviously, because thinking about space, conceptualizing space, that has, of course, a very long disciplinary tradition, interdisciplinary tradition, you can say, starting from really very naturalist or realist accounts, Cartesian space, then certainly experiencing several spatial turns over time. So in the 70s, production of space, notably, Lefebvre comes to mind. The whole constructivist turn with that, so the social production, actually probably rather of place rather than of space. And the recognition that it's, of course, a variety of social processes that are contributing to defining maybe the same geographical spaces, but in very different ways socially. And of course, the whole field of relational geography, which has marked time periods maybe after the 90s, relational geography and frameworks that, for instance, evoke a focus on territory, places, scales, and networks, which have done away to some extent with the notion of boundaries, but they have focused on relations more in particular, making clear that places are affected by relationships towards many other places, and there are notions of spaces of flows, Manuel Castells, or the neo-Marxian tradition, David Harvey, for instance, that have highlighted this interconnectedness and given, of course, less emphasis and less attention to the role of place in these developments. And more recently, of course, you have a variety of turns towards really relational ontologies, meaning indigenous ontologies in particular, as well as new materialism or strands that deal with actor network theory. You might also still count as new materialism. So having a relational account, of course, opens up another entry point towards an understanding of space and actually also different interpretations of what constitutes space there. So as you can see, there are a variety of ways of understanding space, interpretations of space that contribute very important aspects in terms of understanding how space plays out in certain contexts and how spaces are being constituted and how they are then therefore possibly affecting sustainability. They are all very fruitful in their own ways, but they are hardly used in a very systematic way or juxtaposed with a view to questions of sustainability. So what exactly are they contributing there? I think this is precisely where you can see that there is a quite substantive potential to be exploited in looking at what is the role of space in constituting sustainability problems and solutions. So from here, I would just like to jump into the profile of our research institute, because what I've just pointed out as an agenda for spatial sustainability sciences is what we see as the broader framing of our very concrete and more specific research program. So it's a broader agenda, of course, much broader than what a small institute like ours could engage with. However, it is clearly a reference point for us within which we are moving. And as you might have also recognized, this is not an established field, but it's something that can be seen as emerging or maybe latent in a number of strands that are identifiable in the field. Yeah, so what is the Leibniz Institute of Ecological, Urban and Regional Development? First of all, I think I have to say that we are a non-university research institute, so like Eawag, for instance, and of a mid-size. We have 150 people working at the institute. And we're a member of the Leibniz Association, so that is one of the 4 large non-university research associations in Germany, which regroups around about 97 institutes in all disciplines. Forward. We are, in our mission, we are clearly focusing on sustainability transformations, and we use a spatial approach in order to both understand it, but also in order to leverage this. And we have a clear orientation at sustainability, therefore, which provides also for the normative stance within our program. As I just pointed out in framing spatial sustainability science, this is by necessity linking questions of place to questions of dynamics and processes taking place at other scales. And this is exactly what we're doing, even though we do focus on places. And there's a good reason for that. Namely because there is a linkage between places and emergence, which I will come back to later. So that's where we focus on, but nevertheless, we have, of course, a lot of studies that have a global dimension also with a view to urbanization, for instance, or material flows or biodiversity. There's also, with a view to this knowledge to action gap, a clear emphasis on questions of stewardship, on questions of transformative capacity. So how do you get to actually instigate, trigger, and navigate change? That forms an important part of our agenda. Yeah, so this is our own onto-epistemology, if you like. That's the way how we define our research. And as you can see, it is clearly focused on places, regions, cities, neighborhoods. But there is a broader understanding about the types of elements that we are looking into and how they relate to the dynamics that we're interested in. And we use really a broad range of approaches, interdisciplinary, but also transdisciplinary, working together with stakeholders in order to address that. Our structure is very simple. We have 4 major research areas. These are the ones that you can see here. We also have like smaller research groups within that form part of this. Maybe an interesting feature there is we have a permanent living lab in a city, small city on the Polish border. So not in Dresden, which is the main location. But it's permanent in the sense that there's a durable collaboration between the city in particular, but also other local stakeholders in developing and trialing policies and approaches in regard to a variety of objectives. Currently, there's a major project going on with a view to carbon neutrality in 2030, which constitutes a political objective of the city there. Yeah, so that there are these different clusters here. I think they work as thematic clusters indeed. So most of our projects, they are cutting across. They're involving different perspectives and take a very interdisciplinary approach. Extremely important for our research is this transdisciplinary component. So working together with stakeholders. We have a few fundamental research projects, meaning really very much looking into basic methodological questions or others. But I think for most of our projects, it applies that we are working together with stakeholders in knowledge co-production or in also co-creation of particular solutions, which is, of course, also a characteristic of sustainability sciences. And for us, this is given to do so in the context of particular spatial configurations. A particular feature more recently is that we have developed a research data center, which we will further expand over the next year. So this is to underpin a little bit more the quantitative strand and the methodological strand dealing with spatial data sciences, but also with approaches using artificial intelligence in this context. So turning towards particular examples, and here I'm really picking on different research areas and different contributions in order to illustrate a little bit the way in which we work on questions of spatial sustainability sciences. I start here from one of the key challenges that is also a very ubiquitous one, you can say. You can find many places across the globe, which is flooding. And how to address the knowledge action gap there. So for instance, we develop projects that, of course, start from a very basic system and spatial configuration modeling, so that there is an integrated underpinning of the interactions in terms of a natural sciences and engineering approaches, which then allows us to generate models which depict risks, which depict damages also in particular, in relation to flooding, so to run certain foresight processes around these as well. And this is, of course, where stakeholder interaction becomes important, because you do so with a view to developing options for action. So you would want to do so already with a certain understanding of what are the relevant governance structures, what are the relevant markets, and how do they affect actor and agent behavior. And out of that, of course, develop ways of addressing that. First of all, of course, in terms of awareness, but then also increasingly regarding effectiveness and concrete measures for development. So that stakeholders can receive through such projects a better understanding of the ways in which their concrete stakes, their concrete interests would be affected, be they developers, be they engineers, architects or owners or landowners, and then, of course, to provide corresponding options in terms of how to respond. As well as, especially with regard to effectiveness, to use different ways of immersive technologies to expose people to the very concrete experience of such changes in their environments. This is the example of flooding here, of course, where you can use a flood simulation and to do this together with policymakers and or with citizens in order to provide for a better understanding of future risks and, of course, the necessities and options for current intervention and action. So this is the flooding dimension, but obviously you can use the same insights and the same spatial understanding about what is behind it to also ask other questions, for instance, about water quality, and to out of that then develop better informed recommendations and understanding regarding what is required for future action in order to preserve water quality under conditions of climate change, where of course, very substantive impacts can be expected. And to do so again at very different levels. So right now, this was a project which was designed to develop policy recommendations for the European Commission, targeting the Water Framework Directive, and needs to change it. But out of that, we also developed practitioner guidance, which was more targeting the regional and local level. So really trying to influence the ways how responses are being developed at other scales. Or looking at another key challenge regarding biodiversity and ecosystem services. So here we're working on these things on the one hand side through the Spatial Data Center, really at a very fundamental level, trying to integrate quite different and heterogeneous data sets. We are currently looking towards an integration between the socioeconomic panel data for Germany and the monitoring data. We run a monitor for land use and ecological indicators for Germany, which allows you then to depict correlations like this one here, like the level of satisfaction in residential areas and how it relates to provision with green space. So that's soil sealing here, apparently, and the degree of deterioration taking place. So you very straightforwardly come to identify problems, but also responsibilities, and the question becomes a political then immediately, like with energy poverty, for instance. Yeah, it's similar. But in domains which are usually not addressed when it comes to biodiversity or when it comes to climate change, etc., this is not usually visible or understood. So therefore, we also work together with citizens in providing app services, for instance, or developing app services together with cities where you can understand green space accessibility, green space provision, the qualities of green spaces, as well as suitability as a cultural ecosystem service for them, but also for the cities in turn, yeah, to work on the corresponding provision of ecosystem services in planning through developing indicators, etc., that enable them to do so. Oh, this is animated. Yeah, we also work along this strand of biodiversity and nature-based solutions together with communities, together with stakeholders in different ways. One larger project here was really meant to develop a strategy guide for municipalities for how to go about biodiversity in a very fundamental way. So how can you actually promote this? What are the different action fields and what are the different stakeholders involved there? But we do so also in different ways. So thinking about a context within which you do not necessarily have the required political administrative support. So kinds of guerrilla tactics that you need to deploy in order to increase the level of ecosystem service provision or increase the level of biodiversity in your cities. So concepts like urban environmental acupuncture are being developed there. And we do so a lot actually in urban living labs where we collaborate together with the stakeholders to develop such approaches. So one particular project also based on urban living labs here in two cities in Germany that was addressing the question of heat stress and heat resilience. Going really from the individual scale, the individual home, the individual living unit towards the entire building, towards the whole district, and of course the different stakeholders that you need to address in order to do so. So this is a little bit the circle here in the middle where you can see the diversity of actors and stakeholders that play a role in addressing heat resilience. And then again, we mingle these different approaches. So you do a lot of modeling there as well in order to illustrate, to understand as well. But at the same time, you develop measures and you implement these measures together with inhabitants and with different other stakeholders involved there, the developers or the owners of these housing units. In order to test that. And this particular project also received the German Sustainability Award in 2022, also because it has had a transfer component comparing, it was focusing on this typical housing unit that you find a lot in the east of Europe, east of Germany, as well as in East Asia. So we were looking at questions of transferability and the ways how you can use insights that were developed here in a context that has a very different climate, but very similar construction technologies and urbanization patterns as well. Yeah, and of course, towards the relational approaches and relational ontologies, we work on questions of human nature resonance. That again is based on Rosa's resonance theory, so a relational understanding of human nature interactions, and we do so through a variety of experiments, developing, for instance, rituals for people to engage differently with nature in their daily activities, in their daily routines, but also within planning. So how can planning and urban planners address urban human nature resonance in cities, and what role does it play in their approaches? As well as in food systems. So there's like a certain variety of contexts within which we're looking at these things. Food systems, so in restaurants or in supermarkets. So what are the interventions that you can develop in order to, in a targeted fashion, address a reflexivity about human nature resonance? And that is, of course, it's all about different levels of effectiveness. Yeah, there's also a blog here on this project. Yeah, and maybe more recently, as you can see already from these examples that I picked here, these are many projects. Yeah, it's different projects that are looking at different aspects, different facets, which is due, of course, to the projectification, you can say, of the research landscape. So that is a given, but it's also a challenge for this program or for the kinds of approaches that we would like to take. So what we try to do is, of course, over time, to be able to use our own funding to integrate insights that we develop in a variety of projects. And one more recent possibility to do so that we have acquired here is a very large lab approach within the Leibniz Association, which binds together a number of different institutes in order to address this problem complex here, so a spatial action and conflict field around biodiversity, climate, and agri-food, within which we would then like to work on knowledge integration for the purpose of developing very concrete and target group specific transfer products for intervention. So that is still under development. It just started on the 1st of April, so I can tell you more about that, I guess, in a couple of years. But it's a larger endeavor within which we very well see how we can move forward on our agenda in terms of using a spatial lens, essentially to integrate actually many of these aspects and to reflect on the role of space in this problem field as well as in the solutions. Yeah, that leads me also to my final thoughts here on these questions of spatial sustainability science. As I said, this is certainly still an emerging field, so we might be moving into this. But there are still many things to be done and to be explored. Essentially, as I said, I think this requires to think more carefully about this interrelationship between justice in time and space, because this is sort of a constitutive role that space plays here, really. And I refer to Jeff Malpass and his philosophy of topography, which makes very clear that a really ontological thinking about space doesn't really take place yet in the current literature, but it's mostly using epistemologies or heuristics to explore spatiality. So where you can recognize certain features that are spatial, whereas using a spatial ontology would really ask for the substantive, the essential characteristics of space, and these are boundedness, openness, and emergence as sort of interacting features. And I find this extremely inspiring, especially with the view to emergence and the role of place in that. And boundedness, of course, it stands for place. There is, again, also a need for a certain onto-epistemic multiplicity. There are calls for this from many different angles in the sustainability sciences field, as you might be aware of. Anyways, however, there is little thinking about how do you integrate this. Well, the spatial lens does allow you to integrate this in a meaningful way because you can then draw on certain different understandings of space in order to do so, and to on that basis move forward. The different heuristics that are very established also that use certain facets of spatiality can play an important role there. But I think this is a little bit broader, this call for such a multiplicity in the approaches and in the design of research programs already. It's also important to think of space and place as an object, aim, and a means of transformations that in a way corresponds to this necessity to distinguish system, target, and transformation knowledge in transdisciplinary science you may be familiar with. But when you apply this to space, it makes clear that actually much of the current research is addressing maybe the first two, yeah, so to understand space as an object or as an aim or as an aim of transformations, but not so much as a means. And the question of how can you actually use, how can you in a purposeful way draw on space in order to transform is a very interesting one in my view. And last not least, I think there is a lot to be done when we talk about the context within which research is being deployed, so the science policy institutions and their spatial account. If we think about the research programs that we are aware of in different countries, then it is very clear that space doesn't really play a role there. However, this might be quite a crucial consideration when it comes to sustainability sciences, because, as I said, if this is a constitutive element, yeah, then you would have to think about this very carefully in order to make clear where you would want to develop demonstration projects of what sort and what kinds of problems you would want to address where. This where referring, of course, to particular spatial notions in this case. Yeah, so much for the outlook on spatial sustainability science from my side. So thanks for listening, and I'm, of course, available for your questions.